Behold! Power of the Lord. He makes a way where none was before.
And step by step, they trusted the light.
Darkness covered the camp of Israel. The sound of the sea roared ahead, and behind them the thundering hooves of Pharaoh's army drew closer. The people trembled. "Why did we come out here?" they cried. Was it to die in the wilderness? Fear filled their hearts, and their eyes could no longer see the promise, only the danger. Moses stood still. His hands trembled, but his heart did not. He lifted his eyes to heaven and whispered, "Lord, we have nowhere to run unless you open the way." The wind began to rise. A storm moved across the sea, and a sound unlike anything they had ever heard shook the ground. The waters began to move. First a ripple, then a trembling, then a roar, as if the heavens themselves commanded the sea to obey. Before their eyes, the Red Sea began to part. A wall of waters stood on their right, and another wall on their left. In the middle, a dry path glowed faintly in the darkness, lit by the fire of God's presence. Moses turned to the people and said, "Do not be afraid. Stand still, and you will see the salvation of the Lord." And though their feet still trembled, faith began to move their hearts. Step by step, they walked into the path that only believers could see. The wind howled. The waves towered. But through the noise and chaos, a strange peace filled the air. For the first time, the people of Israel were walking not by sight, but by faith. The journey had begun, not through the land of comfort, but through the sea of trust. The wind still blew fiercely, and the path through the sea stretched farther than their eyes could see. Each step echoed on the dry ground, the walls of water rising like towers on both sides. Children clung to their mothers, old men leaned on their staffs, and the young looked upward with silent awe. The sea was alive. It moved and breathed, as if it knew the hand that held it still. Above them, a pillar of fire burned against the darkness, guiding their way forward. Behind them, the pillar of cloud stood as a barrier, keeping the Egyptian army in confusion. No man among them could explain it. No one could command it. But all knew this was not man's doing. As they walked, faith began to replace fear. Each step was a decision, to trust what their eyes could not see. The sound of the wind became a song. The trembling of the earth became a rhythm of courage. And though the night was cold and long, the light from heaven never faded. Moses walked among the people, his face illuminated by divine fire. He spoke softly, "Do not look behind you. The Lord is fighting for you." Every word was a promise, every step a prayer. The Red Sea was not just a road to freedom. It was a test of faith, a passage between fear and trust. For the first time, the Israelites were learning that freedom without faith is only another kind of bondage. They would remember this night forever, the night the impossible became real, the night the sea opened, and the night when belief itself became their bridge. The night was long, but the promise of dawn was near. Behind them, the army of Egypt roared through the darkness, their chariots blazing, their shouts echoing across the sea. The people turned in fear, but then they saw the hand of God was still moving. The pillar of fire turned toward the Egyptians. Its light became a wall of flame, and its shadow became confusion to the enemy. The wheels of their chariots sank into the mud. Their horses stumbled. Their cries turned to panic. But for the people of Israel, the path was still clear. The light still shone upon the dry ground. And then, as the last of God's people crossed to the other side, Moses turned once more. He raised his staff toward the sea. The wind ceased. The sound of rushing water filled the air again. The walls of the sea trembled, and then collapsed. The mighty waters returned, with a force no man could resist. The armies of Egypt were swallowed by the sea. Their chariots vanished beneath the waves, and the cries of their soldiers were silenced forever. The sea closed. The wind grew calm. The dawn broke over the horizon. And there, standing on the far shore, the children of Israel looked back at what God had done. The place of fear had become the place of freedom. The path of death had become the road of life. They fell to their knees. The silence was holy. Then a voice began to sing, softly at first, then louder, until the whole nation joined in praise. Moses and the children of Israel sang this song unto the Lord, saying, I will sing unto the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider he has thrown into the sea. Tears filled their eyes. They had seen what no generation before them had seen. They had walked where no man had ever walked. And now they knew. The God who parted the sea would never forsake them in the desert. The Red Sea closed behind them, but before them lay a new beginning. A new journey had begun, not the journey of escape, but the journey of trust. And as the morning sun rose over the sea, they understood what faith truly meant, to walk when the road is not yet visible, and to believe when the waves are higher than hope. The sea had closed, but heaven had opened. The people of God were finally free. The sea was behind them. The shouts of Egypt had faded. Before them stretched an endless wilderness, silent, vast, and merciless. The people had seen the power of God. They had walked through the sea, yet fear returned with the silence. No more thunder, no more light, only the sound of the wind and the heat of the desert sun. They had prayed for freedom, and God gave it. But freedom, they would learn, was not the end of the journey. It was the beginning of trust. Days passed without water. The children cried. The elders grew weak. The people murmured against Moses, saying, Why did you bring us out here? To die of thirst? Moses looked up to heaven again. The same sky that had opened above the Red Sea was now silent above the sand. He whispered, Lord, what shall I do for this people? And God answered, Not with words, but with a command. Walk to the rock that I will show you. Moses obeyed. He took his staff, the same staff that had divided the sea, and struck the rock. A sound echoed through the valley. A stream of water burst forth, sparkling under the sun. The people drank. Their thirst was quenched, but the lesson had only begun. The same God who opened the sea could also bring water from stone, and he was teaching his people that miracles are not only found in moments of power, but in every breath of obedience. The wilderness was not a punishment. It was a classroom of faith. For in the silence of the desert, they were learning that God's presence is not proven by noise, but by trust. They had seen his hand in the sea. Now they were called to hear his heart in the stillness. And so the journey continued, a journey not just across the sand, but into the depths of faith itself. The days passed. The people walked under a sun that showed no mercy. The wilderness stretched endlessly, and the joy of deliverance began to fade. They had water now, but their stomachs were empty. The children cried again, and the people began to grumble once more. Why did we come here? They said. At least in Egypt we had food to eat. Here we have nothing. Moses listened in silence. He had no bread, no answers, only faith. That night he lifted his eyes to heaven. Lord, he prayed, they have seen your power, yet they forget so easily. Have mercy on your people. And the Lord said, I will rain bread from heaven for you. At dawn, a mist covered the camp. When it lifted, something small and white lay upon the ground, fine as frost, gentle as snow. The people stared. What is this? They asked. Moses said, This is the bread the Lord has given you to eat. They called it manna, for they did not understand what it was. Each morning it appeared, and each evening it was gone. Those who gathered much had nothing left over, and those who gathered little had no lack. It was enough, always enough. But still, some doubted. They tried to store it for tomorrow, and by morning it was spoiled. God was teaching them that trust is not about yesterday's miracles, but today's obedience. Every sunrise was a question. Will you believe that I will provide again? Every handful of manna was a lesson in daily grace. The wilderness was not empty. It was filled with God's invisible care, the quiet faithfulness that feeds the soul. When all else is gone, the people learned that hunger is not the enemy of faith, but its companion. For only when we are empty do we see how full his mercy truly is. And so, under the blazing sun, God fed his children from heaven, not once, but every day, until faith became their daily bread. The manna continued to fall. Each morning the people gathered it. Each evening they were filled. But soon, Another lesson was waiting. A lesson not about hunger, but about rest. God spoke to Moses, 6 days you shall gather it, but on the 7th day there will be none. It was a simple command, yet a difficult one. The people had lived as slaves for generations. They knew how to labor, but not how to rest. To them, rest felt dangerous, as if to stop was to lose everything. But God was teaching them that trust is not proven in work, but in stillness. So for 6 days they gathered, and on the 6th, he gave them twice as much. Moses said, "Tomorrow is the Sabbath, a holy rest unto the Lord. Bake what you will bake, and keep the rest for tomorrow." Some obeyed, and for the first time, they saw a miracle in stillness. For the manna they kept did not rot, but others went out to gather on the 7th day, and they found nothing. The desert was silent, the ground empty. And God said, "How long will you refuse my commandments?" The people bowed their heads. They had learned that faith is not only walking through the sea or trusting for bread, but resting in his promise. The Sabbath was not a burden. It was a gift, a reminder that even when man stops, God continues to provide. The sun set on the 6th day, and peace settled over the camp. No footsteps in the sand, no murmuring voices, only the soft whisper of the wind and the stillness of God's presence. That night, the people rested for the first time, not as slaves, but as children of a faithful Father. And in their rest, they found what the wilderness could never take away, the peace that comes from knowing that God is enough. Weeks passed as they journeyed through the wilderness. The path was long, but the cloud never left them by day, nor did the fire depart by night. Then one morning, they came to the foot of a mountain, a place unlike any other. The air was heavy, the ground still. A hush fell over the people. Moses climbed partway up the slope, and the Lord said to him, "Tell the people to prepare themselves, for on the 3rd day I will come down upon this mountain." The people washed their garments. They stayed at the edge of the mountain, waiting, wondering what it would mean for God to come near. Then came the 3rd day. Thunder rolled across the desert. Lightning flashed from the clouds. The mountain trembled, and a trumpet sounded, long and deep, as if heaven itself was breathing. The people trembled. No one dared to move. Then fire descended. The mountain burned with the glory of the Lord. Smoke rose like a furnace, and the ground shook beneath their feet. They could not see his face, but they felt his presence. It was not the gentle whisper of the desert wind. It was the voice that had divided the sea. And from the fire, God called to Moses by name. "Moses, come up to me." The people fell to their knees. Their hearts pounded in fear and wonder. For the first time, they saw not the miracles of his hand, but the majesty of his holiness. The God who had walked before them in light was now standing among them in fire. And the fire did not destroy the mountain. It made it holy. The people realized that freedom was not the end of their journey. It was the beginning of covenant. The same God who parted the sea now called them to walk in his ways. And as the mountain burned, they knew this was no ordinary flame. It was the fire that purifies faith and reveals the heart of man. The Lord had come down among his people, and the desert, once silent, now echoed with the voice of eternity. The mountain was still burning. The clouds had not lifted. Thunder rolled without ceasing, and the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder. Then a voice spoke from the midst of the fire. It was not the voice of man, nor the whisper of wind. It was the sound that had formed the heavens, the word that brought creation to life. The people trembled. Some covered their ears. The ground shook beneath them, and their hearts were seized with holy fear. "I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage." The people fell on their faces. Every word struck like lightning, burning not the flesh, but the soul. "You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not take my name in vain. Remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy. Honor your father and your mother. You shall not kill. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness." Each command cut through the air like fire. Each truth settled deep within the silence of their spirits. The people cried out to Moses, "Speak to us yourself, and we will listen. But do not let God speak to us again, or we will die." And Moses said, "Do not be afraid. God has come to test you, that his fear may remain before you, so that you may not sin." The voice of God had shaken the mountain, but it was meant to steady their hearts. The law was not a weapon of wrath, but a mirror of love. Through his words, God revealed his holiness, and through their trembling, he revealed their need for mercy. The people had seen the sea divided, but now they saw their hearts divided. They understood that freedom, without truth, was only another kind of slavery. The fire still burned, but now it was no longer a fire of terror. It was the fire of revelation, the voice of God teaching his people how to live. As the smoke rose to heaven, the mountain became silent again, and in that silence, the people began to understand that the greatest miracle was not the parting of the waters, but the speaking of the word. The mountain still smoked with the presence of God. The fire had not faded, nor had the thunder ceased completely. Moses stood alone before the glory of the Lord. The people remained below, their eyes fixed on the fire that swallowed the summit. For 40 days and 40 nights, Moses remained in the presence of God. He neither ate nor drank, yet he was sustained by the word of the Lord. And God said to him, "Come near to me. I will give you tablets of stone, and the law which I have written, that you may teach them." From the fire, 2 tablets were formed, smooth, shining, and heavy with the weight of eternity. The fire that once terrified the people was now carving truth into stone. Each word burned not by human hand, but by the finger of God. And as the flames danced around him, Moses felt the mountain's heartbeat, the rhythm of divine covenant. Below, the people grew restless. Days turned into weeks, and fear turned into forgetfulness. They began to whisper, "Moses is gone. We need a God we can see." They gathered gold and shaped it into a calf. When Moses descended the mountain, the tablets still in his arms, the sight broke his heart. The people who had heard the voice of God were now dancing before an idol. The fire of the mountain was replaced by the fire of rebellion. In his sorrow, Moses threw down the tablets. They shattered upon the rock, just as the covenant had been shattered in their hearts. The sound echoed through the camp, like thunder without rain. Then Moses fell on his knees and wept. "Lord," he cried, "they have sinned a great sin. Yet, if you will forgive them, blot out my name from your book." And the Lord answered, "You have found grace in my sight. I will renew the covenant, but my presence will not leave you." So Moses climbed the mountain once more. The fire was still there, gentle now, as if waiting. God wrote again, not in anger, but in mercy. The new tablets shone faintly in the light of dawn. Moses' face reflected the fire. When he came down, the people could not look directly at him. The fire that once consumed the mountain was now burning within the heart of a man. From that day forward, the covenant was not just written on stone, but engraved upon the soul of God's people. The fire was no longer a sign of destruction, but a promise of presence. God had chosen to dwell not in thunder or flame, but in hearts made humble through obedience. The journey through the wilderness was not yet over, but something within them had changed. They no longer feared the fire. They followed it. The same flame that once stood between them and death was now their light through the darkness. And as night fell upon the desert, a pillar of fire rose again in the sky. It was the sign that God was still with them. The covenant was alive. The fire had not gone out. The mountain still burned in the distance. But below, the people's hearts had grown cold. Days had turned into weeks, and Moses had not returned. The desert wind whispered doubts through the camp. They said, "Where is this Moses, the man who brought us out of Egypt? We do not know what has become of him." And they turned to Aaron, saying, "Make us a god who will go before us." Aaron hesitated, but the voices of the people grew louder. He said, "Bring me your gold earrings." The people hurried to obey. They gave their treasures, the very gold that God had allowed them to take from Egypt, and cast it into the fire. From the flames, a shape began to form, a calf of gold, shining and lifeless. When it stood complete, the people shouted, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you out of Egypt!" And they built an altar before it. They offered sacrifices. They sang and danced, and the sound of their revelry rose into the desert air. The same people who had trembled before the voice of God were now bowing before the work of their own hands. Above them, the mountain still smoked with holiness. But below, sin had taken root. The fire of heaven met the fire of rebellion. On the mountain, God spoke to Moses, "Go down, for your people, whom you brought out of Egypt, have corrupted themselves. They have made a golden calf and worshipped it." The voice of God trembled with sorrow and wrath. "I have seen this people. They are stiff-necked. Now leave me, that my anger may burn against them, and I may consume them." But Moses fell on his face and cried out, "Lord, turn from your fierce wrath. Do not destroy your people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to whom you swore by yourself." And the Lord relented from the disaster he had threatened to bring upon them. Then Moses descended the mountain, the tablets of the covenant in his hands. As he drew near the camp, he heard the sound of singing and laughter. Joshua said, "There is a noise of war in the camp." But Moses answered, "It is not the sound of victory or defeat. It is the sound of singing." When he reached the camp and saw the calf and the dancing, his anger burned. The light of the fire reflected in his eyes. The covenant he had just received was now broken before his very sight. He lifted the tablets high above his head, and with a cry that echoed through the valley, he threw them down. The stone shattered against the rock. The sound was like thunder splitting the earth. The covenant of stone was broken. The covenant of hearts lay in ruins. The people froze in terror. Their laughter died, and in the silence, they realized what they had done. They had traded the living God for the image of metal and dust. Moses burned the calf in the fire, ground it to powder, scattered it upon the water, and made the people drink of it. He said, "You have sinned a great sin, but now I will go up to the Lord. Perhaps I can make atonement for you." The camp was silent that night. The fire that once brought joy now cast only shadows. And on the mountain, a man stood alone, holding nothing but a broken heart and the hope of mercy. The camp lay in silence. No one touched the fires. No singing rose from the tents. The people sat in the dust, trembling at what they had done. Moses walked alone toward the mountain of God. His steps were heavy, but his heart was heavier still. He had seen the shattered covenant. He had tasted the bitterness of their sin. Yet he ascended once more, not as a victorious leader, but as an intercessor. At the foot of the burning summit, he fell on his face and cried out, "Lord, they have sinned a great sin. But now, if you will forgive their sin, but if not, blot me out of the book you have written." It was a prayer few could pray, a plea born not of anger, but of love. God answered him from the cloud, "Whoever has sinned against me, him I will blot out of my book. But go now, lead my people. My angel will go before you." The words carried both judgment and mercy. God would not forsake his holiness, but he would not abandon his people, because one man stood in the gap. Moses descended the mountain again, his face marked by fasting, his heart marked by sorrow. He returned to the people and said, "You have committed a great sin, but I will go up again to the Lord." Day after day, he interceded. Night after night, he pleaded. At last God said to him, "Take a tent and pitch it outside the camp. I will meet with you there." So Moses built the tent of meeting. It was far from the camp, a reminder that sin creates distance between God and his people. When Moses entered the tent, the pillar of cloud descended. The people stood at the doors of their tents and watched in awe. Inside the cloud, God spoke with Moses, as a man speaks with his friend. It was a depth of intimacy no one had ever known. Moses said, "Lord, if your presence does not go with us, do not lead us up from here." And God replied, "My presence will go with you, and I will give you rest." Then Moses dared to ask, "Show me your glory." God said, "No one can see my face and live. But stand upon this rock. I will pass by. You will see my back, but my face shall not be seen." It was mercy beyond measure that a holy God would allow a sinful man to behold even a glimpse of his glory. The next morning, Moses climbed the mountain again, with 2 new stone tablets in his hands. The Lord descended in the cloud and stood with him there. And the Lord proclaimed his name, the Lord God, merciful and gracious, long-suffering, abundant in goodness and truth. Moses bowed his head and worshipped. He said, "Lord, forgive our iniquity and our sin. Take us as your inheritance." And God answered, "I will make a covenant. Before all your people, I will do wonders, such as have not been done in all the earth." The people had broken the old covenant, but God himself renewed it. The rebellion of many was overcome by the intercession of one. As Moses descended with the new tablets, the people saw his face shining. They were afraid to come near him. The glory was a sign. God had forgiven. God had restored. God had not forsaken his people. The covenant was alive again, written not only on stone, but on hearts humbled by mercy. The camp waited in silence. No one moved freely, for the shadow of their sin still hung over them. Yet something had changed. A faint whisper of hope moved like a breeze through the tents. Moses returned from the mountain, with new tablets in his hands and a radiant light upon his face. The people gasped. Some stepped back in fear. Others fell to their knees. The glory that once burned upon the mountain was now shining through the face of a man. And with that light, their hearts began to rise from the ashes of guilt. Moses called the leaders of the tribes. He read to them the renewed covenant, words of mercy, words of truth, words that bound the nation to God once more. The people responded with a single voice. "All that the Lord has spoken, we will do." For the first time since the sin of the golden calf, unity returned to the camp. But God did more than forgive. He gave them his presence. He said to Moses, "Build me a dwelling place, make a sanctuary, that I may dwell among my people." The people wept when they heard it. God would not merely lead them from afar. He would live among them. They brought offerings freely: gold, silver, linen, wood, spices, oil, not forced by fear, but moved by love. Men skilled in craftsmanship began to build the tabernacle. Women spun thread of blue, purple, and scarlet. Young men gathered acacia wood. The elders polished silver bases. Each person gave according to the measure of their heart. And when the work was completed, Moses stood before the tent. He lifted his hands, and the people grew still. Then a cloud descended from heaven. It covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. The light was so intense that even Moses could not enter. The people fell to the ground as the presence of God settled among them like fire in the night. From that day on, the cloud rested upon the tent by day, and the pillar of fire by night. When the cloud lifted, they set out. When it remained, they stayed. Through desert heat and cold night winds, his presence guided them. Through hunger, he provided manna. Through thirst, he gave water from the rock. Even in their rebellion, he did not abandon them. The presence of God became their compass, their protection, their identity. They were no longer a group of fugitives from Egypt. They were the people of God. Each morning they awoke to see the cloud shining above the camp, a reminder that mercy endures longer than judgment. Each night they slept under the glow of the fire, a reminder that the God of Sinai was now the God who walked with them. The covenant was restored, the nation rebuilt, and the journey renewed, not by their strength, but by his presence, not by their righteousness, but by his mercy, not by their perfection, but by his unfailing love. And as the people watched the fire dance above the tabernacle, they understood that the greatest miracle was not the parting of the Red Sea, but the God who chose to stay with them in the wilderness. The fire that once judged, now comforted. The cloud that once terrified, now guided. The voice that once shook the mountain, now dwelled among them in grace and glory. A nation broken by sin was restored by presence, and the God of the covenant had made them his own again. Morning broke over the wilderness. The first rays of sunlight touched the tops of the tents and awakened a nation reborn. The cloud of God hovered above the tabernacle, glowing with quiet strength. The people stirred slowly. They stepped out of their tents and lifted their eyes. The sight of the cloud reminded them God was still with them. It was a new beginning, a new chapter in their journey, not defined by their past failure, but by God's renewed mercy. Moses walked through the camp. He watched the people gather their belongings, prepare their animals, and ready themselves for travel. These were no longer the fearful slaves who trembled at Pharaoh's chariots. They were a people shaped by fire, humbled by grace, and strengthened by the presence of God. When the cloud lifted above the tabernacle, a silence fell. Every eye watched, every heart waited. Then the cloud began to move. A shout went up across the camp. "The Lord is leading us. It is time to go." The tribes formed their order. Judah marched in front. Reuben followed. Then the Levites carried the sacred structure on their shoulders. Behind them came the other tribes, each in their place, each under their banner. The desert stretched endlessly before them, yet they walked with confidence. For the same God who parted the sea, who fed them with manna, who forgave their rebellion, now led them again. Day after day, they followed the cloud. Its shadow shielded them from the scorching sun. At night, the pillar of fire guided their steps and warmed their camp. When they grew weary, the cloud settled, and they rested. When danger threatened, the fire blazed brighter, and they found courage. Each moment was a lesson. Strength was not in their numbers, nor in their leaders, nor in their own resolve. Their strength was in His presence. Some days the journey was smooth. The wind cooled their faces. The ground felt firm beneath their feet. Other days were harsh. The sand blew mercilessly. The heat pressed upon them. The children cried from thirst. But through each trial, the people remembered the covenant. They remembered the God who restored them, and the God who restored them did not let them fall. He provided wells in dry places. He sent quail when they hungered. He gave water from impossible rocks. He taught them to trust, not the path they walked, but the one who walked with them. Moses often stood at the edge of the camp, staff in hand, eyes lifted to the cloud. He prayed quietly, "Lord, lead us according to your wisdom. Teach us your ways. Let us know your heart." And God answered, not always in words, but in presence. The fire that glowed in the night reminded Moses that God's faithfulness could outshine any darkness. The cloud that guided their steps reminded the people that God's mercy was deeper than the desert. As they pressed forward, their hearts began to understand. The promised land was not merely a destination, it was a promise, a sign of relationship, a testimony that God keeps every word He spoke. The wilderness was not punishment. It was preparation, a place where idols were stripped away, where pride was broken, where faith was born, and with each passing day, the people's hope grew stronger. The new covenant carried them. The presence of God surrounded them, and the journey continued. Toward the land He had sworn to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. The journey began with fear, but now they walked with purpose. They walked as a forgiven people, a chosen nation, a community held together, not by perfection, but by grace. The promised land waited ahead, but even before they reached it, they were already living in the miracle of God's leadership. Each sunrise was a reminder that God had not abandoned his people. Each sunset was a promise that he would finish what he had begun. And so Israel marched one step after another, carrying the covenant, following the cloud, and trusting in the God who had made a way through the sea. The wilderness stretched before them like a vast sea of sand and silence. It offered no comfort, no shelter, no promise of ease, yet the people walked on, guided by the cloud, trusting the unseen hand that had delivered them from Egypt. But faith, like gold, must be refined, and so the wilderness became their furnace. The first trial came quietly, a shortage of food. The people gathered what little remained, but it was not enough. Fear murmured among the tents. What will we eat? Has God brought us here to die? But the next morning, when the dew lifted, the ground sparkled with white flakes. It is manna, Moses said, bread from heaven. The people tasted it, sweet like honey, gentle like dew. It was enough, more than enough. But God did not send manna to fill their stomachs alone. He sent it to shape their hearts. He commanded them to gather only what they needed for each day, not more, not less. For faith must learn how to depend. Some tried to store extra, but it spoiled overnight. Others doubted and gathered too little. But when they returned home, they found their measure complete. In this way, God taught them that daily trust was stronger than daily fear. Their second trial was thirst. The sun burned fiercely, and their water skins grew light. The children cried from dryness. The herds stumbled. Give us water to drink. The people cried to Moses. Moses lifted his eyes. He felt the weight of their desperation. He felt the burden of leading a nation through a land without rivers. Lord, he prayed, what shall I do with this people? God answered, strike the rock. Moses struck it with his staff, and water burst forth. Cool, abundant, life-giving water flowed into the desert. Once again, God proved that impossible places are the perfect stage for his power. The third trial was battle. The Amalekites attacked. Without warning, they preyed on the weak, the weary, the stragglers. Joshua gathered the men to fight. But the true battle was not fought with swords. Moses climbed a hill and lifted his hands toward heaven. As long as his hands stayed raised, Israel prevailed. When he grew weary and lowered them, the enemy advanced. So Aaron and Hur stood beside him. They held up his arms until the sun set. Through unity, faith, and perseverance, Israel won the battle. It was a day that taught the people that every victory comes from God. But God uses human hands to bring it to pass. More trials followed. Some were external. Some came from within. Complaints, fear, jealousy, disobedience. Each one revealed what was hidden in their hearts. But each one also revealed the patience of God. He corrected them, yet he did not abandon them. He disciplined them, yet he did not forsake them. He walked with them, step by step, through every test. Through hunger, they learned dependence. Through thirst, they learned trust. Through battle, they learned unity. Through failure, they learned repentance. The wilderness was no longer just a place. It became a teacher, and the people grew, slowly, painfully, but surely. Their faith, once fragile like reed grass, began to take root like trees planted by water. With each trial, their eyes opened wider to the God who sustained them. They understood that the promised land was not for the proud, but for the prepared, not for the fearful, but for the faithful. And so the trials that once frightened them now strengthened them, for they discovered that the wilderness was never meant to destroy them, but to shape them into the people God had destined them to be. The final stretch of the wilderness lay quietly before them. The sands no longer felt like chains. The winds no longer sounded like threats. For a generation shaped by fire and mercy, the desert had become a place of revelation. From mountaintops to valleys, from trials to triumphs, God had walked with them every step of the journey. Now the people gathered on the plains of Moab, and before them rose the distant hills of the promised land. For the first time, they could see it. The land sworn to Abraham, flowing with milk and honey, a place where wandering would end and inheritance would begin. Moses stood before the people. His hair had whitened, his steps had slowed, but his eyes still burned with the same fire that saw God in the bush. He looked at the young men, born in the wilderness, at the women who had carried children through deserts and storms, at the elders who had endured slavery and lived to see freedom. You have seen, he said, all that the Lord has done. He carried you as a father carries his child. The people listened, their hearts trembling. Moses continued, the Lord has led you through great and terrible wilderness, that you might know that man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of the Lord. Every scar they carried became a testimony. Every tear they shed became a seed of faith. Moses reminded them, you lacked nothing. Your clothes did not wear out. Your feet did not swell. The Lord your God has been with you these 40 years. The people wept softly. They remembered the manna. They remembered the water from the rock. They remembered the battles won when they had no strength. And then Moses lifted his staff toward the hills. Beyond these mountains, he said, is the land the Lord swore to your fathers, a land of wheat and barley, vines and fig trees, pomegranates, olive oil, and honey. Hope washed over the people like a fresh wave. But Moses' voice grew solemn. When you enter this land, do not forget the Lord. Do not let comfort erase your remembrance. He warned them that blessing can be as dangerous as hardship if the heart forgets the source of its strength. He pointed again to the hills. This land is not just a home. It is a covenant fulfilled, a promise kept, a sign that God's faithfulness outlasts every desert. The people lifted their eyes. The land shimmered in the distance, fields waiting for harvest, hills waiting for builders, rivers waiting for thirsty travelers. They stood on the edge of everything God had promised. Joshua stepped forward, young and strong, chosen to lead the people into the inheritance. Moses placed his hands on him and blessed him. The Lord himself goes before you. He will be with you. Do not fear. Do not be dismayed. The people watched the moment with reverence. The God who had lifted Moses' arms over the sea would now lift Joshua's feet across the Jordan. Then Moses turned one last time toward his beloved people. You are a people chosen for his name, he said softly. You are the children of the Most High. Walk in his ways. Hold fast to his word. For the land before you belongs to those who believe. The people bowed their heads. Some covered their faces. Others raised their hands to heaven. They knew the journey had not been easy, but every step had been guided by a faithful God, and the promise ahead was worth every mile behind. As the sun set behind the mountains, the camp glowed with expectation. Tomorrow they would cross. Tomorrow they would possess the land. Tomorrow they would see the fulfillment of generations. But tonight they rested in awe, for the God who parted the sea had kept his word. The promise awaited them. The faithful would inherit it, and the journey of belief would lead them home. If this message touched your heart, share it with someone you love. May God's presence lead you, just as he led his people through the wilderness.